the issue of zakah, in fact, is a very serious one, and also the issue of studying it in a contemporary context is very important, because historically all our fiqh was created under different economic situation, under different factors of production, not the same that we have them today. So, and reading in the books, and unfortunately our fuqaha, rarely you find one of them who is innovative, who can go outside what he reads in the book. So reading in the books, you find things that do not relate at all to our lives. I am not going to be fabricating things. I will be, inshallah, innovator in that, but not fabricator, in a sense that what we will discuss, we will support it all the time by the Quran, text from the Quran and the Sunnah. But that doesn't mean we go by the traditional understanding of the fuqaha, what we find in the madahib, all of them without exception, that do not apply to our world of today. So of course, you know that zakah was mentioned in the Quran and made obligatory in the Quran. But so that would require me to make a little introduction and then come to the controversial issues. The controversial issues are essentially is who is subject to zakah and what properties are subject to zakah. But لابد, there is need, it is necessary rather, to make that introduction to draw the context of our discussion. Okay, at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, zakah came as one of the 5 pillars, and it was considered very important in several hadith. It is considered the 3rd pillar of this religion. In fact, it is also probably the 1st pillar of the economic system. When we talk about the Islamic economic system, definitely both prayers and declaration of faith do not come first. Zakah probably comes first. So it is very important, and the objectives of it, as mentioned in the Quran, the first thing is تطهرهم وتزكيهم بها, purification and improvement, upliftment. Could it be spiritual or material? Why not both? It could be either way. There's no limit to upliftment, there's no limit to purification. Spiritual, material, social, improving, reducing the social ills, that is part of purification. And of course, to zakihim means upliftment, means development, means growth, means betterment. All these are included in the concept of to zakihim biha. But we remember, خذ من أموالهم, take out of their properties, صدقة تطهرهم وتزكيهم بها, this zakah that will purify and uplift them with it. The distribution effect is clear also in surah, in verse number 60 of the same surah number 9, that exclusively zakah should be distributed to only these 8 categories that are mentioned in verse number 60. So definitely the distributive objective is clear in defining to whom zakah may be given. So we have verse 103 and verse 60 of the same surah that define really the objectives of zakah. It is the third pillar. It is a right of the poor. In more than one verse, it is considered right of the poor, haqq. It is a right of the poor, and there's no other religion and no other economic school or economic philosophy that makes an obligation on the rich, direct obligation as a right to be given to the poor, other than this religion and this economic system. In all others, you can sometimes give and sometimes don't give. Sometimes take from the rich and sometimes you may not need to take from the rich. But in this religion and in this economic system of ours, it is an obligation on the rich and a right of the poor that has to be taken all the time. Essentially, of course, a right of the poor, but if the poor is satisfied, it can be used for other objectives which are mentioned in verse number 60. Its economic role, it is a permanent system. That is, you want to call it a tax, it is a kind of tax, definitely, but it's not a tax really, because it should come out of the person and need not to be collected by the government. And even if the government doesn't collect it or doesn't make it obligatory, it remains obligatory by virtue of the religion, by virtue of the faith we Muslims believe in. So it remains obligatory on me, between me and God, regardless of the government, regardless of the charitable organizations that may exist, etc., etc. It is not a high percentage that makes it difficult to do, but it is also effective. We have several studies that show that you don't need really high percentage of a gross domestic product in a country to be transferred from the rich to the poor in order to relieve the poor people from their poverty and bring them at least to the poverty line that is below it. We consider them poor, so to bring them up to that. There are several studies in that. For instance, in Pakistan, there was a study by the World Bank that Pakistan requires about 4%, 4 to 4.5% transfer payment from the rich to the poor, 4 to 4.5% of GDP to be transferred to the poor in order to bring all the poor in Pakistan up to the poverty level, take them from below and bring them to that level, so they are at least not below that. There are also estimations of zakah that ranges in the estimation of the total zakah proceeds between 2.5 or 3% up to 7.5%, depending on the economy, and of course depending on what view you believe in, what is subject to zakah and what is not, which we are going to discuss. So it is effective in a sense. The other thing of making it also effective is the continuation of it, that it is continuous year after year. And it need not to be used only for handouts. Rather, the main objective is to enrich the poor, to bring the poor to a situation of self-sustained at least. And there are many incidences, many hadith in this regard, and the Prophet ﷺ emphasized that concept. So along with the riba, it is very important. We need to notice that zakah, if you look at it from being taxed from the tax point of view, it is a tax on capital and income, not only a tax on income. Most sorts of capital are not taxed in today's world, in today's countries, capitalist countries. Most forms of capital are not. And probably you may say the richest persons in the capitalist societies today are a lot less taxed than the middle class or even the upper poor, as an example in America. So big chunks of wealth is not subject to tax in America, especially the financial wealth. Financial wealth is not subject to zakat. There is about several 600, 700 trillion dollar worth of options, and all of them are not subject to tax. So they are not taxed. Only the income is taxed in America, whereas zakah is on both income and wealth. Historically, zakah was able to abolish or remove all visible poverty. Of course, there may be non-visible poverty, people who feel themselves more proud than accepting to take zakah and want only to depend on their own selves, even though that their income, their resources do not allow them minimum satisfaction that is considered up to the poverty level. Even with that, they prefer to live under that poverty rather than accepting taking help from others. That was definitely in the past and was more common probably in the past, but I've seen it also myself. I've seen people who refused to take zakah in Pakistan. When I made the study on the application of zakah in Pakistan, although they are poor and they were estimated as poor, but their self-pride did not allow them to take zakah. And of course, there are several also incidences by the Prophet ﷺ where he encouraged this kind of spirit. Rather, you be patient than accepting handout. Be patient, be more tolerant than accepting help from another person. That there are many incidences of that. Of course, at the same time, refusing help is not encouraged. When a help is needed, refusing it is not encouraged. But here, that balance between them, between the self-pride that I want to do it myself without getting any help from any others, and the idea of if needed, you should take help. There is a balance between them, no doubt about that. But people also, even in our world, there are this kind of people that do not accept help because of their self-pride. Need not to be related to religion. Many of them may be religious persons, yes, but it needs not to be related to religion. It could be simply self-pride. So it did happen in the past. At least the visible poverty was eliminated to the extent that the officers of zakah would say, we did not find anyone who accepts to be given zakah. So there were excess zakah collected, and Umar ibn al-Khattab was asked what to do with it, and then it was transported from Yemen to Medina and given for other objectives. At the time of the second Umar, about 100 year later, less than, 100 year of the Hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, about the year 101, at the time of the second Umar, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, it is said also that in several provinces of the Muslim land there was excess zakah. The proceeds were collected and then we don't find enough people to give them. We gave all the poor, but there is still excess of zakah. And Umar ibn Abdul Aziz was consulted by his officers. What do we do with that? His idea was do anything that helps people. Buy slaves, at that time there were slavery. Buy slaves and liberate them. Make water fountains on the major highways between cities, and make rest areas also for people, and so on. So they use them because one of the destination for using zakah is what is called fi sabilillah, and of course this is open-ended and it depends on the situation. At one time the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said al-hajj is fi sabilillah, helping your mother is fi sabilillah, helping other people is fi sabilillah, making roads better is fi sabilillah, everything is fi sabilillah. There is almost consensus among our classical fuqaha historically that one thing cannot be done with funds from the zakah proceeds, that is building mosques. You don't build mosques from zakah. You build mosques from your own properties. This is the right of the poor. You shouldn't build mosques from it. Mosques should be built by people, individual people who want to make something add in addition to zakah. It did happen in the past and it can do it again. I find no reason why not, and some studies show something close to those ideas. As I mentioned earlier, it is estimated in Pakistan that you need a transfer of about 4% from the rich to the poor to bring all the poor persons to the level of poverty, bring them up. And the estimation of zakah is between 2.5 to 3, up to 7.5%, depending on the economy and how do you apply it. There is a recent study in Morocco. The writer, in fact, sent me a paper based on that study, on her PhD dissertation, that says she estimated the zakah that can be collected in Morocco, and she came up with the conclusion that definitely that will close the gap of poverty, meaning that it will bring all the poor in Morocco to the poverty level at least, so there will be no person below the poverty level. This is very recent, just in 2019. Now we come to the issues that are really controversial and that really need to be looked at, and there are things that are interesting. At one time I had a discussion with one of the persons who happened to be the Grand Mufti of one of the Arab countries, one of the big Arab countries, well-known person. He said, well, look, Munzir, I agree with you, really, zakah should be on wealth, not only on income. And if it is so, but how do we do with a widow who takes care of orphans and her only income is a rent of another property that she rented, and she gets that rent to feed her orphan children. What do we do with her? I remember the saying of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam: you don't make the rule for the exceptions. Always there may be exceptions. Always there may be special cases, you deal with them. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, at one time, a man came to him who made a grave sin, having sex with his wife in Ramadan. And you know that requires fasting for 2 months. So he asked the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet told him, you have to fast for 2 months. He told him, I could not fast even in Ramadan, and you want me to fast for 2 months? So the Prophet ﷺ laughed. What can you do? When you deal with exceptional situation, you have always to find exceptions. So he told him, then you have to feed 60, because you know the option is first fasting, second feed 60 poor guys 2 meals a day. So the man told him, well, I don't have anything to feed them. How do I feed anybody? So the Prophet ﷺ asked him, okay, wait here, maybe we can get something. Then in a while, some donator or donors came to the Prophet ﷺ with a bushel of date, without telling what is the size of that date. You know, to feed 60 60 poor guys, you need at least probably 1 kilo a day, so it's about 60 kilos. But there was no mention in the hadith what was the amount, but it was a bushel anyway, some amount of wheat, something that normal person carry. I wouldn't say it can be 60 kilos. So the Prophet told him sallallahu alaihi wasallam, okay, take this date and feed it to some poor in your area. Then the man again looked at the Prophet and told him, by God, there is no household in this whole city that is poorer than us. So the Prophet ﷺ told him, go and eat it with your family. So here we deal with an exceptional case. And you can always deal with exceptional case, but you don't make the rule for it. Another person once asked me also, well, I have a real estate property, and you say that real estate is subject to zakah. I told him, well, definitely, I say it is subject to zakah. But what do I do if I now, it doesn't give me adequate income to pay its zakah? You know, in many places, it may happen that the rent on real estate, either because of law restrictions or because of other reasons, economic reasons, could be below 2.5% of the value of that property. So I told him, then, then you have to sell it. Really, in the final analysis, you are making a wrong investment decision. So recently, that same person, I met him 2 weeks ago, and he said, do you still believe in your own opinion that you told me about several years ago? I told him, yes, definitely, I still believe in it. You have to sell it. As a matter of fact, in the final analysis, the Prophet ﷺ also told us that we should invest the properties of the poor persons, of the poor orphans, not poor really, of the orphans. We should invest the property of the orphans that are under our guardianship, so that the zakah will not wipe out that property, because over time, definitely, zakah will wipe it out. If you calculate it, it takes about 67 years for any property to become amount of nisab. No matter how much you make the nisab,
but to reach the amount of nisab, which is considered like minimum, where which we'll discuss it, the zakat becomes obligatory on it if you own that or more. But if take from any property 2.5% every year, it will definitely reduce it to make it reach the nisab, which will make it non-zakatable, because we assume the owner of it is poor now. So to bring a person to poverty. So the idea here, if the Prophet told us to do that with the property of the orphans that are under our guardianship, it goes without saying that with our own property, we should make the right decision so that the return of the property should be above the amount of zakat that is required, and therefore our property will not decline, will not be wiped out with time because of the payment of zakah. So definitely, yes, if you own a real estate property, and with no doubt, I'll make it as a statement and in a clear way, with no doubt, any person and any fiqh school that claims real estate are not subject to zakah are wrong. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran said, take out of their properties, did not say take out of their money. It is not an issue of money. It is an issue of amwalihim. خذ min amwalihim. It is not at all. And now, if you are rich by that thing that you own, then in the saying of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said about zakah, should be taken from the rich and given to the poor. When he sent the officers to collect and distribute zakah in Yemen, he told them that, well, you advise people first about La ilaha illallah, and then about prayer, and then tell them about zakah, to be taken from the rich and given to the poor. Is that person who owns the real estate rich or poor? If he is rich or she, then he or she is subject to zakah. You cannot claim it otherwise. By all means, there is no sense at all to claim otherwise. We will discuss these justifications, but anyway, speaking in economic terms, and I want to be clear in that, in economic terms, we distinguish between wealth items and income items. Income is always measured as a flow within a period of time. So we talk about income in a year, gross domestic product in a year, or income in a month, in a year, in a period of time. It's always income is a flow, accumulates through time. Wealth is a stock, an item at a given of time. Of course, whatever income that is not expended, that is not used up one way or the other, is added to the wealth and accumulates with the wealth. So always we relate wealth item to a point of time. Here, for the sake of discussion, and always also in economics and in accounting, for the sake of discussion, we take wealth item at the beginning of the year. Income is the flow throughout the year. What is not used up of income at the end of the year is added to the stock, to the wealth item. So at the end of the year, you have a new amount of wealth. But then you say that is 1231, the year, for instance, 2020. At the beginning, you say, okay, this is January 1st, wealth item as on January 1st and of that year. Then, in other words, always you add to the wealth items those items that are, or the part of income that is not used up. So there is connection between them. Now, at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who were the rich? People who own gold and silver, money, stored in their homes. People who own other items, industrial items, could be mirrors, could be swords, could be any other item. Traders who have inventory of trade. People used to import things from Sham and from Yemen, you know, these two trips to the north and the south in the Hijaz area. So you got all these, and so you have inventory items. People own have agriculture and agricultural products as income. They have income, labor income. They got cattle, camels, and especially camels. Camels is the pride of the Arabs at that time, especially Bedouins and also Arabs in the settlement in Mecca and Medina. You should imagine Mecca and Medina. How much was the population at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? None of them reached 10,000 people. None of them at that time reached men, women, and children. None of them reached 10,000 people. The estimation is that Medina had about 3,000 people, and it could not make any army beyond 1,000 person. And 1,000 person means about 1/3 of the people in Medina. Even that army of 700, not 1,000, that was in the Battle of Uhud, had several what we call children. And the Prophet ﷺ tested them. You are too young, he told some of them. You are too young to be in the battlefield, so go back. He sent back some of them, and some of them complained that, oh no, we want to be, and then he tested them really for their physical abilities, and some of them were admitted. So, and it was 700 that was in the Battle of Uhud. So the cities were small. In Fatih Makkah, that largest army the Prophet ﷺ was able to collect, to accumulate, and all the tribes all around Mecca were included. So it was Mecca and several other tribes around it in the year 7 when he went for Fatih Mecca. So in other words, the properties that were there are camels, gold and silver, trade inventory, and then you have the produce of the land. Was the land really a property? No, at all. The land was free, literally free. At one time, Az-Zubair ibn al-Awwam in Medina, after establishing the state, and we are in a country and a state and whatnot, and we have Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the head of the state, Az-Zubair ibn al-Awwam came to the Prophet and told him, I want to make some agriculture, some agricultural investment, so I need a piece of land. So he told him, okay, let's get you a land. They went to just outskirts of the houses, and told him, okay, hit your horse and take the land from here until the horse stops. Then the horse ran for a while, and of course was tired after maybe a half kilometer or so, 500 yards or maybe 1,000 yards, and he stopped. So he told him, go there and use your bow and arrow, and throw an arrow also, add a bonus land to take it. This land became very valuable later. It is said after the death of Zubair, this and other lands that were similar, bought or obtained by Zubair, were sold by his son Abdullah to pay his debts. That's a different story. But anyway, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, land had no price, was not an item of wealth. So the Prophet ﷺ did not make zakah. The normal practice of a Bedouin at that time was to put some seed in the land, and then because Bedouins were nomadic, they were moving all the time. So they put seeds in the land and go to some other place following water areas or rain or other to get living, and then after 6-7 months come back on their other return to that areas depending on the season. If they found plant, they will collect it, harvest it. If they don't find the plant, somebody else may have harvested it. This is the way agriculture was at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Of course, outside these small settlements like Medina and Mecca. And Medina was a settlement, no doubt. And Mecca was that also. So the wealth items that were at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, residence houses were not wealth items. There is not a single report, and I insist and repeat, not a single report that a land was rented, agricultural land, or a residence, a house, was rented at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, or even at the time of Abu Bakr or Umar or Uthman or Ali. The earliest report about renting in Medina came at the time of Imam Malik, that is after the year 120, because Imam Malik was born about the year 120. He died in the year 179. So it wasn't really, it was 100 years after the Prophet when we started hearing about rental properties, rental real estate in Al-Medina. All that period there was no renting. In fact, even in Mecca, there are several hadith that it is haram to rent a property in Mecca. Yeah, it is haram. There are several hadith that
land or property.
rent
And
do
any
not
property
rent.
or land.
Properties of Mecca should be open for the pilgrims, not even prevented from pilgrims. And if you have a house in Mecca, you don't rent half of it at the time of pilgrim even. You open it, take you the half that you can live in, and leave the pilgrims sit in it free. Several hadith to that concept. I don't say it is haram today to rent in Mecca or in Medina. No, it's not haram. But I am quoting the historical change. How was it historically? There was no rental. Rental were not heard of in Mecca and Medina at the time of the Prophet ﷺ or after him. So the items of wealth were livestock, mainly camels, and next sheep, and to a much lower level cows, because cows almost don't exist in the earth. Although they are mentioned in a hadith, but the hadith is even controversial about cows. Okay, so gold and silver, which were the money of the time, in different forms, including the money form, coins, and so on, business inventory, and debts on others.
Hocam, zakatable items, does it means the item subject to nisa also?
These are
Something else?
subject to zakah. It means the items on which zakah is imposed. Now the nisab issue is a criteria of zakatability. If you own that much or more, you are subject to zakah. If you own a little, we don't. And that gives us the idea that in zakah, we don't deal really with people on the pennies. We don't. We overlook the issues of pennies. So we will discuss the zakah, the nisab. If you own that much then it is you will be subject to zakah. Below that amount, which is considered the nisab, you are not subject to zakah because you are not rich then. Owning few dirham or few dinars or few camels, you are not rich. So this is the idea of nisab.
Those villas and the other properties didn't consider as wealth items at that time. Huh?
They did not exist. This is the point. Abdullah ibn Umar, the mosque of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yeah, of course, you don't imagine it the way we see the mosque of the Prophet today. For those of you who made Hajj or visited the Medina and the tomb of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, now it is a huge building. It was a very moderate building, even doesn't have full walls. The walls did not go up to the ceiling. It's half walls usually, and then you have some poles, and on the top you have pieces of wood, and connected between the pieces of wood with these branches of the date trees. So you put these branches, these long leaves that cover. So this is the way the roof of the mosque of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the way it was, and the walls were not up to the roof anyway.
But at the same time, in some other places like Rome, Istanbul,
Well, but these were not known yet to them.
Hojam, sorry, I don't want
Yeah,
to disturb
it's okay.
a lot, but I need to pick up my daughter. But I saw that when I was a banker, I was a banker. I saw that people with 30,000 lira paying zakat, people with 30,000 account balance. But I saw people with 5 million USD houses, apartments, they don't. So I thought that there is a problem here. Then I made mathematics of zakat, and I never published that. They said you are going against the nas of the Islam. So I really wonder this how you connect this discussion.
Yeah.
But I think I will follow up through YouTube.
Okay.
But so these properties in the other regions of the world, other parts of the world, is not known as wealth in the by the Arabs.
They were not among the Arabs in the community where zakah was imposed. There was no such properties, no rental properties, no refineries of oil refineries and all factories and all.